The horn blows like a throat being cut, and the world snaps forward into motion before I can even decide what to feel, the sound hollow and final and full of someone else's money. They shove me toward the tree line with hands that smell like peppermint gum and gasoline, and I can feel the cold leather straps bite into my wrists where they looped over my shoulders like somebody fastening a crate. A man 3 feet away counts down, 8, 7, 6. And his voice is slow, bored like he's narrating a workout, while a crossbow rasp clicks as it's cocked somewhere behind him and the metal taste of adrenaline fills my mouth. I am 12 and I don't know that's the number people will keep for a long time, but I remember the weight of being 12 like a scar. My feet are bare on clod-packed dirt, the ground cold and rough and full of small stones that press up into my soles, and I can feel shadows under my toes like the whole woods are listening. Melissa Brooks stands a step off, phone in one hand and a paper-thin smile that smells like business plans and bleach, and she says the price out loud like she's checking inventory. 65,000 cash per rules. The way she says it makes the money into something you can wrap and ship, not people, and the phones she juggles, one with a cracked case, one blinking blue, look like instruments in the orchestra of how she sells us. She talks to the buyers like they're clients at a board meeting, not men with crossbows, and she smooths a spreadsheet in her head while tucking my smallness into a category. Standard perimeter, she says, clipped, and I see a little corner of a ledger in her face where everything I am can be tallied. She uses words like upgrade and add-on, and I hear the bell of commerce ringing louder than the horn. There's a hunter with a voice like sand, maybe former military, maybe he learned to keep his mouth like that, and another with a banker's laugh who takes off his glasses to cough as if he's uncomfortable at the thought of exertion. One of the men sparks something in the air when he says he likes to wound, not catch. Everybody here is showing off in a currency I don't yet have words for. The horn finishes its last note and the countdown hits one like a judge's hammer. Melissa steps back, all neat shoulders, and the shove turns into a shove of expectation. I run because running is what she taught me in a room with maps and 3-ring binders and a lamp that never turns off. Branches slap my calves hard enough to leave red lines, little flags of my passing, and the bark cuts and the dirt throws up smells of wet root and old leaves. I tuck my head and move low, thinking of zigzags we practiced in the yard, of breath control she drilled into me until my ribs knew the rhythm of being invisible. Her lessons were sharp and efficient: how to trail smear with mud, how to breathe like a sleeping dog, how to coil and uncurl like a living thing that is not worth catching. By the time their lights scythe over the trunks, I'm already a shadow hooked into a hollow log, curling in a space made by the rot of a fallen oak where the air tastes like mold and the inside of my palm smells like pine. I wedge myself in and pack the hole with dead leaves so I won't sound like a human. My heart is a drum and my knees are knives, but I am still 12 and clever in the only way left to me. I watch the hunters move like men in suits at a cruel trade show, and one of them, a man with a voice like old leather, leans near the log and says in a tone meant to be gentle, "Come out, little rabbit." He says it as if I am an animal and not a child who was taught to survive by a woman who called it business. I press my face to cold rot, counting my breaths, and know something inside me changes shape while the hunters search the dark for sport, and my mother tallies the night in dollars. After that first horn, the business settled into a rhythm faster than a heartbeat. Twice a month she booked runs and treated the calendar like inventory, circling dates in red and black while clients picked days like they were reserving conference rooms. Melissa called them market nights. In a voice like she was arranging linens, she'd tell a buyer the options, list upgrades, whisper the price ranges out loud like a menu, 48,000 for standard, up to 110,000 for the nights with extras. She kept spreadsheets on her cracked phone and a little black binder with names and deposit receipts. The numbers were never dusty, they were active, and I learned to read the table of my life by columns and margins. Her training was curriculum and punishment at once, and she taught like a headmaster who'd lost any heart he might have owned. She made me change clothes on command, wearing coarse sweaters one night, soaked camo the next, because scent and texture mattered to the buyers more than my comfort. She drilled footwork until my ankles remembered how to roll without crying, made me run ladder drills on gravel while she counted out loud, told me to breathe through my nose like an animal hiding from its own bellows. She bought old fieldcraft manuals and photocopied pages for me to memorize. She circled passages in blue ink and made me repeat them until the words sounded like prayer. Mud became armor under her instruction. I learned to smear river sludge behind my knees and along my chest to confuse dogs and boots, to press against wet stones and let leaves cling like an apology. Zigzagging wasn't improvisation anymore, it was geometry. Enter wide, cut close, drop off the trail, then double back across old tracks to confuse scent. I learned to listen to the land as if it was talkative, identifying where deer fed last week by the crushed fern, where a hunter had left a cigarette butt by the creek. Sound and smell taught me property lines better than any map. The way a fence post creaks, the burn of a windbreak, a neighbor's generator coughing 2 valleys over, those things showed me the borders. The clients varied like the pieces on a chessboard. Some came with knives, shiny and small, keeping silent like they wished to break something private. Others brought rifles that barked across the ridges and left me tasting metal for days. There were hunters who wanted to catch you with their hands, who learned to read the same old tricks and forced a rumble against your ribs until you taught yourself how not to gasp. One man wore a suit with a pin for a bank, his chest hair powdered white with frost from his breath, and he complained about sweat as if the sport required a different kind of etiquette. Each night the rules were different and the stakes edged up in the ledgers. After a handful of runs, something in me sharpened. I started looking for holes in their system the way Melissa looked for holes in a contract, constant, patient. I found a line of bear traps the previous owner had left on a ridge and learned to trip them so a steel jaw snapped forward on a false trail, not on me. I'd reset a trap so it closed harmlessly on a sapling and then lead a pursuer to that sapling, watch his ankle snag and twist while I melted away. I learned to hang a scent trail that led across a rotten plank and into underbrush where a pursuer's boot would find mud and not me. Small sabotage, small proofs that I could tilt the chessboard. But competence didn't mean invincible. One night a man named Brandon Hale, tall, compact, with the flat humor of someone who'd been taught to kill without thinking of the after, found me faster than I expected. He was quiet and efficient, a former soldier who moved like a bred animal, and within 30 minutes he had me against a stump with his hands flat at my throat. He squeezed like he was testing a switch and all the air left me, velvet dark at the edges, and I remember the metallic sheerness of fear on my tongue as he watched me stop. My knees folded inward and the world flattened into the smear sound of leaves and his breathing. When I woke, there was a crescent bruise at the base of my throat and the taste of mud in my mouth, and Melissa's ledger somewhere listing the night as complete. I learned Melissa ran this like a small corporation, not a mother. Spreadsheets lived on her cracked screen with names, dates, and prices in neat rows, and she scrolled them like a dealer checking his inventory. There was a private forum she used, a shadow site where clients chose rules and posted bids, where men argued over whether knives counted as hands-on or Class C and whether whips were an upgrade. She sold a premium night vision package that came with extra fees, a chunk of change for thermal sensors and infrared mounts, and she read the add-on list out loud like a salesperson showing a buyer leather options. I remember the smell of coffee as she balanced that phone on her knee and negotiated cancellation clauses with a voice that had no softness left, because she had taught herself to make pain look like logistics. Her emails were rehearsed lies, her calendar a weapon, and every appointment came with a PDF contract that folded my childhood into line items. I tried to run after the fourth hunt because somewhere I still believed running could end it. I shoved past a pickup and cut into wet brush at night, thinking the woods would forget me if I became fast enough. I did not get far. Melissa had a cruelty for detail. She snapped photos during forced clothing changes, pictures she took while I was bent over in a towel or tugging on scentless shirts, and those photos slid into the same ledger she kept for clients. She used them like a tether. When I panicked and went to a teacher at school, I told Mrs. Carter the truth with an ache in my throat, and she looked at me like I had given her something inconvenient. Melissa had a story already planted, that I was a runaway and that I sold my body for cash, a line dirtied and softened for public ears, and there were notes from a therapist that Melissa had arranged ahead of time to seal that lie with authority. The therapist's pages said I had a history of risky behavior, that I had left home before, and those boxes were ticked in ink. It felt like watching a courtroom rehearse a verdict against me before I even spoke. They had lawyers on retainer, names that smelled like polished shoes and shiny teeth. Melissa kept a contact list of people who could file a defamation claim, who could whisper to a principal, who could call ahead to a sheriff and grease his memory. The community around us softened toward her because she knew how to make a town believe a story they wanted to believe. She paid for that softness. Her friends were rehearsed, her neighbors had scripts, and the ledger of receipts that proved her work was buried under glossy charity events and PTA checks. It wasn't accident or luck, it was planning. Every handshake she made was a shield for what she did in the dark. By the 9th hunt, I had stopped being only the hunted and started measuring the edges of the world they sold me across. I learned the layout like a mechanic reads a car, where the camera is hunched on poles with blinking red diodes, how one camera timed out 30 seconds after a motion trigger, how a maintenance shed's generator coughed at minute 20 and shut down. I rode along on supply runs, Melissa's alibi that she needed boxes, batteries, and propane, and I learned how to slip rope into my jacket, how to stow a pocket knife wrapped in tape so the metal would not jingle, how to put a book of matches under the lining of a care package. I held taped box blades in my palm and imagined them as instruments of escape, not violence. I palmed a coil of thin cord and practiced sliding knots until my fingers could tie them even when they shook from fear. There were quiet rehearsals I did alone at night, probing the camera arcs with a flashlight and noting shadows, mapping the trees by the way they threw sound, timing the hunters by their breathing and the cadence of their radios. I drew lines in the dirt with sticks and recorded the sequence their lights made across the creek. The more I learned, the more room I had inside my head for plans that were not just about surviving, but about collecting proof. I started keeping little things in a hollow of my boot. Tape, a folded receipt I'd slipped from the maintenance shed, a thin envelope of change with names scribbled on the back. Those clippings and stolen scraps felt like cash to me, proof that I could make the ledger show a different truth if I ever had a chance to force the book open. Melissa grins like a woman closing a deal, and the grin is the kind you can feel in your teeth because she announces the new product like it's fresh fabric on a rack. 5-man premium for night 15, she says, all clipped and bright, and the private forum lights up with whispers. She calls it last person standing, and I hear her add the part everyone wants: extra bonuses for blood, upcharge for gore cams, a surcharge for live telemetry. She sells levels and upgrades like a hotel clerk. This time she sold confidence and cruelty wrapped together and handed to men who feel entitled to both. She brings the girl with her like a catalog item, and I watch the way she sets the child down. Maya Lopez, 11, small enough to fit in the crook of her arm, hair in a messy braid that smells like laundry soap and fear. They make us wear white dresses so the buyers can see movement from a distance, a choice that is practical for them and deadly for us, and the fabric stings cold against my arms when I pull mine on. We stand side by side in matching cloth, my dress a costume I never chose, and I can see the men pass bottles of whiskey around as if we are appetizers at a terrible dinner. They clap each other on the back and flip coins, call out numbers like odds at a racetrack, and mark bets on who will bag which child. One of them taps a betting form on his phone and smirks at Melissa like she's the hostess of a gala while we are the entertainment. The smell of whiskey and diesel and cheap cologne mixes with the damp earth and makes my stomach turn. Everyone here turns fear into a spreadsheet and then laughs over the margins. Everything switches in my head from old survival drills to immediate tools. I have spent months stealing rope and knives and matches, and I don't waste the memory now. I wedge fishing line into my pocket because it's thin and can be looped over branches where a hunter might step, and I sharpen a stake I found in the maintenance shed until it will catch boot leather like a tooth. I hide a coil of cord inside a hollow stump I know to be rotten on one side, and then camouflage that stump with fresh leaves so it looks whole, adding small tools inside where the hunters won't see them at a glance. I take Maya aside when Melissa is turned and whisper nonsense about keeping her warm while I smear mud behind her knees and on the inside of her wrists, because I know the dogs in the air will follow the wrong trail if I can mask her the way Melissa masked us with lies. I set trip snares where the trail narrows, tiny loops tied to a stake hammered into soft earth under a bed of leaves, not to maim but to slow and to send a hunter stumbling and cursing while I guide Maya past. The fishing line I string at neck height will tangle a radio strap or tear the brim from a hat and force someone to slow, and the stake snares will surprise a boot and twist an ankle. I make sure the hollow stump is within reach. It's a cache and a last resort, the place where I slip extra rope and the box blade I wrapped in cloth. I cover my work with leaf litter and ducked branches, then move through the trees making a phantom trail of my own that loops and doubles back so their scents will anchor on nothing but mud and rot. Melissa hands out rules like folded bills, and the men inspect us like livestock, adjusting watches and checking thermal lenses as if we are props for their toys. They move confident that the purchase is complete, that every contingency is on the table and every legal backdoor has been greased, and they do not notice the small, patient gestures of sabotage I leave behind. I think of the ledger she keeps, the names etched in neat columns, and I count in my head the price of each life they think they own. I remind myself of training: keep breathing slow, count steps, stay low, and I press all of that into the plan I am making by the hollow stump and the line. When the horn blows this time, it is meaner, like a command that has been perfected over many nights, and the world flares white and tree and shadow. I grab Maya's hand without asking permission because there isn't time to be polite, and her fingers are thin and hot with sweat. I pull her close and whisper in a voice I learned to keep steady, "Follow exactly where I step." She does not say anything back, only nods once hard, eyes wide like mirrors, and I lead, feet counting the rhythm of deception I have built. Branches snag at our sleeves, mud kicks as we move, and for the first time since being sold, I feel the sick, sharp edge of something like hope cutting through the dark, beneath the horn and the men and the ledger. The horn is a slap that breaks the night, and we move like practiced shadows, me ahead, Maya tight to my side, and the first trap answers with a sound like a snapped neck of a twig in a hunter's curse. I hear him run and I hear the metal catch, and then a man goes sideways over a rope I set across a narrow deer rut. He hits the ground hard and comes up coughing, hands clawing at his throat when a loop cinches his jacket and jerks him forward. He doesn't die, he swears and pants and the wind takes the sound, but that break in the hunter's momentum gives us two good heartbeats and a path. I pull a handful of creek mud and smear it angrily over Maya's white dress where it will be seen, because white shows movement and muddy white looks like bad luck, not like a trail. I move from camera to camera like a thief in daylight, and I remember the arcs I mapped. A low pole 2 trunks over, a bush camera bolted to a stump, 1 low-mounted unit about chest high for a child's perspective. I wedge my hand under the metal cover and feel an SD card, small, thin bite at my fingers. I pop it free and press it into the pocket under my shirt, knowing each card is a file of names and nights and receipts. I smear the lenses with thick clay until the infrared is a useless glow, until headlights just bloom into white and the sensors blubber and die. I roll the clay with my palms and make sure fingerprints smear into the mud. Each camera I blind is a thread cut from their tapestry. Then I hear him. Brandon Hale's voice is low and sharp and runs the trackers like a conductor. He calls coordinates into a radio with military cadence, numbers snapped out clean. Grid 037, move bearing 120, sweep left to the dead maple. The way he speaks tells me he learned this by hunger and drilling, not by reading a weekend manual. I count arrows still in his quiver when he draws light in the beam. I see the glint and the tell is small. Only 4 shafts left, maybe 3, and my throat tightens because that means he's saving kills for the right moment. He snaps orders and the other hunters fall into his rhythm like bad instruments in an orchestra he's forcing to play. My phone is dying. I see the battery blink amber and know I have maybe a minute if I'm lucky. Earlier I'd rifled Melissa's car, her door left open in a hurry, and found a burner tucked under a glove, the kind you don't register with a name, and now I fish it out like a last coin. I punch the numbers with fingers that don't want to stop shaking and type a short message because I know long ones will die with the screen. I jam coordinates into the text, Latin long I learned from a muddy fence post and a reflector I saw, and I hit send to 911. The screen flashes red for a breath and then goes dim. It might not go through, but it might, and every chance matters. I grab a walkie-talkie I'd lifted from a hunter's belt and breathe out 5 words into it with a voice I force flat and loud. Help kids, armed men hunting. I toss the unit toward a thick patch of alder and let its signal chatter like a crying bird. The sound peals toward the hunters and their dogs, and I watch as 2 of them run with the radio noise, convinced they've found a direction. I don't wait to see their faces. I duck into a water-filled culvert I found during a supply run and slide like an animal into the cold. The water is waist-deep and smells of oil and old leaves, and it hisses past my jacket as I pull myself forward on my elbows. Mud swallows my hands and my shirt sticks to my back, but the culvert keeps our scent low and mudded, and it pushes us out near the logging road I mapped earlier. The culvert is slow and small, and I have to grit my teeth against nails tearing at the concrete, but Maya breathes quiet beside me and counts under her breath like a prayer. Behind us, the hunters shout and curse, and one man's heavy boot slaps a log and sends the echo like a bell. I know the burner I sent might show a ping in a dispatcher's view, and the tossed walkie might pull 2 men away, and I have a few SD cards in my shirt that might someday show everything. For now, I pull us forward through the dark water and keep counting steps, keeping to the rhythm I taught myself to survive. The culvert felt like a throat closing around us, dark and wet and full of the sound of our breathing, and I counted with Maya because counting kept panic from rising. My knees were in cold water that tasted like rust and old leaves, and every scrape against concrete felt loud enough to wake the world. We moved on elbows and knees, my shirt dragging and my hands scraping for purchase until the light at the far end grew like a promise, and we pushed our way out into mud and air that hit like a slap. We were filthy and shaking, mud dry and clinging in streaks down our legs, and for a second I let myself taste the idea that maybe we were simply alive. I made a spear from what I had, an arrow shaft I'd kept from a hunter's quiver and a coil of cord I'd stashed months back, lashed tight to a stout sapling branch until it felt like an extension of my arm. I moved high along the ravine lip where the dark thinned and waited, breath slow and counting steps in my head. A hunter peered over the edge, eyes bright in the beam, and I drove the spear without thinking of the weight of it. Metal bit muscle, and he folded with a wet curse. The smell of iron came quick in the cold air, and the man swore, which bought us a herd of seconds to move. I didn't want to kill. I wanted to stop him long enough for sirens to catch up, and the spear did what I needed it to, not more. In the distance, a wail rose and fell like it was maybe 2 miles away. the kind of sound that could be approaching slowly or could be smoke on the wind, and we used that sound like a metronome. I gathered a small bundle of dry pine needles and bark, wrapped it in cloth, and set it to smolder under a flat rock near the maintenance shed where Melissa had parked. Smoke began to climb like a bad omen, thin and blue at first, and I knew she'd notice because she always watched for anything that might touch her property line. While the smoke took shape, I lit a tiny controlled burn in a leaf pile closer to the road, just enough to make a bright flare and a smell, and then stepped back to watch her choices. The plan was simple: draw Melissa and some hunters toward a staged problem while we slipped toward the logging road. It felt dangerous and small in my palm, like holding a match to a ledger. The headlights of patrol cars came like thunder and then steady lights, cutting the trees into long white knives, and voices shouted orders as men moved with the kind of training that meets danger without drama. Detective Marcus Bell stepped out of the shoulder of a cruiser and his voice cut through the chaos with clean authority. "Move them here. Secure the perimeter." He was calm in a way that made the noise around him seem silly, and he took command not with anger but with a pen and a notepad. He had the kind of face that said he'd done this before, and that helped, because I needed someone who would listen to facts and not the theater Melissa had built. When he turned to me, I handed things over like I was giving up a part of myself. I pulled SD cards from my pockets one by one and let him see mud still smeared on the plastic. Then I offered an envelope I'd slipped from the shed with petty cash and receipts folded inside. I laid a hand-drawn map of every camera and trail on his hood, arrows, times, little excess where I knew they kept supplies, and told him where to find the hollow stump cache and the maintenance shed key that Melissa kept taped under a box. He listened without flinching, then signed his name with a silent efficiency and placed the cards in a clear evidence bag, sealing them with a strip and writing the tag number. Detective Bell asked for a factual statement, and I gave him one. Names, dates, the places I'd seen cameras, the times of the supply runs where Melissa kept ledgers and photos. I numbered the SD cards as he asked, told him which pocket each came from, and indicated the stump cache behind the fallen oak. He called for an evidence tech and a patrol to secure the shed and told a uniform to get medical on site for the man we'd speared and for Maya. The way he took custody of the proof felt like a small legal miracle. Plastic, tape, signatures, things that could be held up in a room full of polished teeth and rehearsed lies. As they led us toward an ambulance light, hands gentle but firm, the adrenaline that had kept me sharp all night started to leak out like water from a torn bucket and left rawness where my courage had been. Maya held my hand and whispered nothing, just a small, steady squeeze, and Detective Bell folded my map into an evidence folder with a look that said he'd get it in front of someone who couldn't be bought. It wasn't a happy ending yet, but it was the beginning of the part where someone looked at the books. I let myself believe that for a breath while the sirens came closer, and the woods finally began to fill with men who were not paid to pretend. Deputies moved through the trees like workers clearing a site, boots loud and efficient, and the woods filled with radios and orders that boiled down confusion into tasks. One hunter I'd tripped earlier ended up on his back with a bear trap latched to his calf. He shouted for a lawyer while medics crouched over him, unhooking metal and smoothing his face with a damp cloth as he cursed and wheeled for a phone. The trap made him small, scrambling, and his voice cut high with panic while a deputy wrote it down and a paramedic checked circulation. The whole scene messy and real, not like the tidy accounts Melissa kept. Brandon Hale tried something desperate. He broke from a tree line and ran, sleeves shredded, clothing slashed where thorn and blade had given him a ragged edge, and he limped hard when a deputy tackled him by the logging road. He smelled of smoke and damp cloth and the rush of a man who'd been forced to use every trick and then failed. They cuffed him careful but fast. He kept his head low and gave the kind of glare men give when they think a deal can still be made. A medic checked a thin cut on his shin, and a deputy read him his rights while the evidence tech photographed the torn fabric and the limp like it was another angle on the night. They found Melissa at the gate, phone in hand, trying to pull herself into the language of lawyers and denials. She demanded to speak with counsel like a machine reciting a script, voice tight and brittle, and when they put the cuffs on her, she spluttered questions about authority and paperwork until the edges of her voice cracked. Detective Marcus Bell kept his tone flat and did not gloat. He told her they had secured the cameras and images, that they were cataloging every SD card, every receipt, and every name. He said it plain and factual in front of me, and the fact that he said it made my chest loosen in a small, stinging way. In the days after, the work turned into paper and signatures. Claire Sutton, a social worker with a steady presence, sat with me in a safe room while I gave a factual statement, dates, names, the layout of the property, and the exact wording of contracts I'd seen. I handed over the SD cards one at a time and watched Detective Bell seal them into evidence bags with numbers and tape. I placed the slim envelope of petty cash on the table and watched him log the receipts I'd tucked inside. Claire filled forms and asked questions in a flat voice that let me be clean and precise. I recited what I knew, not what I felt, and she wrote it down with careful handwriting. 3 days later, in a courthouse that smelled of cold coffee and reused paper, a judge set bail for Melissa at $2,400,000 and read the charge list in a voice practiced at shutting off drama. In the weeks that followed, the prosecutor worked like someone laying a building foundation with all the photos and footage I'd turned over. Hunters started to flip when they saw the footage and the receipts. Officers would bring a man in a room and show him an SD card where the ledger numbers matched a deposit, and men who had seemed invincible started naming names for lighter sentences. The military hunter, Brandon, took a deal and got 9 years, his lawyers negotiating down with his cooperation as leverage. Over the next 10 weeks, other hunters took plea deals of varying lengths depending on how much they gave up. Some got 4, others 7, with terms adjusted for cooperation and prior records. The prosecutor used the SD footage and the petty cash envelopes like a scalpel, cutting holes in Melissa's defenses by lining up dates, phone numbers, and deposit slips that tied her directly to the bookings. Witnesses flipped and testified about spreadsheets and private forums and the premium packages, and their words lined up with the files I'd handed over. I sat in courtrooms signing forms and listening, and the small justice felt slow and bureaucratic but real, built of little facts and paper that would stand in the light where Melissa's neat lies once did. They moved me out of the crisis house after 8 months into a quiet place where George and Evelyn Carter lived, and the relief felt strange and thin at first. George fixed things for the neighborhood like he fixed his old truck, steady hands that made noises you could trust, and Evelyn made dinners that smelled like safety in a way that made me almost forget to be suspicious. They gave me a small room at the back of their ranch house with a single lamp and a second-hand desk, and they let me close the door without asking 1,000 questions. That space was the first thing that didn't try to own me. Maya went to specialized care 2 counties over, which cut small threads between us into thin phone calls, but we had supervised video calls twice a week so her face grew familiar in a square of light. The social worker scheduled a supervised in-person visit for the following month, and I counted down to it like a small map in my head, planning what to say and what not to say. The visits were careful and slow, checked off with lists and rules, but seeing her in real life for a single hour was a thing I built toward every day. The separation felt like a bruise that kept brightening and then dulling, but having someone to hold across a screen did not feel like nothing. Therapy began with a clinician who knew trauma and didn't try to fix me fast. Dr. Elaine Knox asked questions and then waited through the quiet until I could answer them without flinching. I went twice a week and ran every morning, a ritual Dr. Knox suggested to give my body a predictable contract with breath and motion, and for 11 months I kept that contract like a promise. Run, come back, sit in the room, take a breath. The nightmares didn't leave, they just rearranged themselves into less frequent guests, and the panic was now a measured sound that I could hear coming and ready myself for. Progress was not a line but a series of small stitches. I worked part-time at a hardware store near town, stocking nails and giving directions for the right kind of bolt, and the work grounded me because pieces fit together and so did the tasks. I studied for a GED in the lunchroom between customers, a thin stack of worn textbooks spread across a crate, and my foster parents clapped quiet praise when I passed a practice test. I saved every extra dollar from paychecks, pocket money from a shift that meant more than income. It was currency I could spend on a different future. I wrote down goals on the back of receipts and folded them small like talismans. The garage at the Carter house became my patch of privacy where I planned a small workshop I could call mine, a place to work with wood and metal and the honest resistance of tools. I bought a small bench with my savings and a used drill, and I practiced joining boards and sanding edges until my hands remembered how to make things that lasted. Building taught me the shape of patience and quiet focus, and it grounded my hands in something that did not demand I be brave all the time. It was not therapy in a white room, but it helped the same way a steady rhythm helps a throat heal. I keep one evidence envelope at the back of my desk, the one I sealed for myself the night the police took control. The last SD card, a crumpled receipt, a small strip of paper with a name on it. Sealing it felt like closing a wound with stitches I could not undo. I don't open it often, but I know it is there. I run 3 miles most mornings now, in real shoes on a suburban sidewalk, feeling pavement and muscle instead of fear fluttering under my ribs. The runs are a way to measure ordinary distance, to prove to myself I can cross space without looking over my shoulder. I make a small plan now. Buy Maya art supplies with the cash I have saved, thick paper and paints and brushes she can keep, something she can mark up and call hers. Healing is not a tidy miracle. It is small and careful and painfully human, made of routines and receipts, of tight sentences in evidence bags and afternoons spent sanding a table. I hold the map of those nights like a tool and not a trophy. And when I close my eyes at night, I count my miles and the days until the visit, steady as a metronome that keeps time for whatever comes next.